think they just gave up, but anyone who's joining us with a recording, I'm so sorry we lost the connection, so it wasn't on purpose that we did a runner on you. My phone, my computer just froze. We've been looking at this handout which I loaded on your course, and we're looking at different terms that we have for areas. I think tarsal is a good one as well. Tarsal referring to the ankle region. So far, we've just highlighted a few terms: orbits for the eye sockets, mental for the chin, cervical for the neck, thoracic for the chest, axillary armpit, umbilical to the belly button region, brachial arm, and the cubital, this elbow pit area here on the opposite side of the elbow. Carpal, wrist, palmar, for the palm, pollex, thumb, femoral for the thigh, patellar, kneecap, and tarsal for the ankle. Let me see if there's anything on the other side that's worth of. There's two word of noticing. Popliteal. What is popliteal? Knee pit. Yeah, the other side of the knee. I don't know. What's the English word for it? Okay. See, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. Plantar, sole of the foot. Otic is a good one. So that refers to your ear, or sometimes you see a word auricle used about that. Cervical, again, the neck area. If we look at the different parts of the vertebral column, so cervical, vertebral, lumbar, sacral, they are parts of that. But I think that if you just have a general idea of those, you're doing good. They will become much, much, much more familiar as we go through the material. But everyone kind of feels like if you had that handout around, you could make it work. Yes. I'm just going to open the same slides for the online recording now that I lost our students. I feel so bad. Check with your neighbor if there were any new ones that you had never heard. Just while that's teaching that you would make do assignments. Is there any new ones that you had not heard? Any fun ones? Check with your neighbor while I'm getting this set up. I love that. Get to know each other, because your lab partner will be your best friend if you ever miss a class. Okay, and for our online students, again, I'm sorry if I lost you, and I'll provide this as a recording as well. We were just looking at these different body parts. Okay. You still get to hang out with your lab partner or with your neighbor. I'm asking you to take off the dots that you put earlier. I know you worked so hard to get them on the skeleton, and now move them to match with the color with these parts that I've listed. This would make a great spot test question that I'd be like, oh, can you find this and this and this? And then I just walk around and look at if you have colored dots at the right places. So you can do it again alone or as a group, but try to make sure that you get one skeleton where you get a chance to practice these terms. How are we finding it? Not too bad. Yeah, I like this. How are you guys doing? Good. Getting set up. Awesome. Awesome. Needing help. You're getting Thank you. Done good here. Yes. This would be kind of stuff that I would do in the spot test. And like I said, the first one we'll work on it together.
Oh, that's like oh yeah. But I don't know. I think
I normally pull the questions to the exams and lab practicals from things that we've done before. So that's why I'm not doing it. You guys are on it. You're on it. Good stuff. Oh, correct. Yeah. Good job. Good job.
oh no, that's the white. So cool.
Oh.
That humming sound is making me so sleepy. Is there any group that's still working on theirs? Shall we go through together? Let's go through together. Where do we find orbital region? I see like all sorts of illustrations. Yeah, around the eye sockets. Good job there. How about your thoracic region? Yeah, people are like really good. Chest region, your palmar, palms, femoral. Yeah, we're going down to the thigh. Cervical. Yeah, the region of the kind of neck region of the vertebral column. Then on the right-hand side column, we have tarsal. Where are your tarsals? Ankle, good. Caudal, wrist, yes. Axillary, armpit, occipital, yeah, back of the head. I know my pronunciation is different from what you're used to. So when you hit your occipital region, that's where your visual processing is. That's why you see stars. We'll talk about that once we get to the nervous system. But honestly, seeing stars kind of makes sense. That's why I watch cartoons. Popliteal. Yeah, back of the knee. Good job. You would totally all, if this was the question, you would get 100% in that spot test. Honestly, I have no curveballs in my class. It's so straightforward. So what I'd like to do next, we've covered a bunch of directions, and we've covered a bunch of regions. I'd like to talk a little bit about the ways how we can cut the human body to study different parts. Because a lot of the time when we study human body, we need to kind of look inside. And we use certain planes to visualize that, okay, now we're looking inside the human body of this and that part. So let's have a look of that together. These are the 3 planes. Some of them have multiple names for the same thing. Are you all able to see it okay? Yeah. Let's go through it together. They're going to be something that's going to be that we are keep coming back and we keep referring to them. So word of knowing. So the first plane that we're going to look at here has 2 different possible names. Median plane or sagittal plane. It kind of depends on textbook and part of the world, which one is being used more. But median or sagittal plane divides you into the left and right side of your body. And it can be mid-sagittal, which means that it follows that midline. Or it can be just sagittal. It can be a slightly off the midline. So divides you into the left and right. Everyone good with that? We see a nice picture underneath here. Individual on the abdominal region, you can see the vertebral column, you can see the belly, intestines, and hip region as well. So very common imaging plane to use in MRI units and other units where you might go. The next one is kind of, I like teaching this because it makes me happy. Frontal plane gives you front and back. So anterior and posterior side. But the reason why it makes me happy is when I get to talk about coronal plane. It means the same thing as frontal plane. And I always think of it this way that, okay, where does the coronal plane cut you? How would you put on a crown on yourself? I practiced that. So it cuts you where it would cut you if you put on a crown. To the front and back, anterior and posterior side. I know, my life is so starved of joys. You can see really nice coronal plane through the chest. You can see heart, lungs, liver, stomach, some other stuff. The last one that we have is transverse plane, sometimes also described as a horizontal plane. So it divides you into the upper and lower part, superior and inferior part, and it can be at any level of your body. But again, you're kind of looking into the body from the top, as if the top would have been removed. So you can see the liver, we can see our pancreas, we definitely see our vertebral column here, the heart, and so on and so on. Any questions about these planes? Word of knowing, word of getting used to. I think I could ask in a spot test that if you look at your skeleton, I think that's a question there. If you look at your skeleton model, in which plane has it been cut? Yeah. Or what's the other name for it? Median or sagittal? If you told me, oh, it's cut on mid-sagittal plane, I'd be like, oh, extra credit. I'm all about extra credit. I live for that. Okay. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is that our body, I'm just hoping that comes up next. Yeah. Our body can be divided into multiple different empty spaces that we have inside. And it'd be a lot to start to just study them from beginning. So I'm going to divided into two. We have dorsal cavity and we have ventral cavity. Dorsal cavity refers to the structures that are towards the spine. Ventral cavity refers to the structures that are towards the belly side of your body. So towards the anterior and posterior. So let's go through first the dorsal body cavity. It's on yellow on this diagram. I'm trying to get a highlighter. So the dorsal body cavity is made of two parts. It's made of your cranial cavity, so where your brain is going to be inside the skull, that space. And it's made of your vertebral cavity, which contains the spinal cord. So in between the vertebrae of the vertebral column, there's a small hole within which the spinal cord runs in. So two parts make up our dorsal body cavity, cranial cavity and vertebral cavity. Everyone good so far? Yes. Let's have a look at our ventral body cavity. So the belly side of the body. I only need you to know three cavities there. Thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity, and pelvic cavity. So thoracic referring to the chest cavity, abdominal to the abdomen, and pelvic then to the pelvis area. Those three together make up your ventral body cavity. Everyone's still feeling good about those. Yeah. We could go and divide the thoracic further. I don't think we're going to do it at this point. We'll do it later on when we get further in our studies. Thoracic could be divided into the pleural, where the lungs are, and pericardial, where the heart and great vessels are. But we'll leave that for later. So next thing that your textbook, I had a little activity. Do you want to do that, or you kind of feel good about those body cavities? You feel good about those body cavities. I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, I just want to get home. No, I promise I don't. But this is the way how your spot test is kind of structured. That I would show you structures and I would ask you, can you mark them? And then we're happy. Your textbook goes into two different ways of dividing your abdominal area into either quadrants or 9 different regions. We won't dwell on them too much on this class. I just want you to know that there's ways. And the idea is that if you have pain in one area, you can kind of then work out what organs are there. So that's why doctors prefer to do that, and we prefer to mark. You can be a little more detailed as well with how you name structures. But if you look, a lot of the naming comes from the terms that you already know, like umbilical region or lumbar region, and so on. What I do want to spend time with you today, as the last time said that it was the last, and then it wasn't, the students were mad at me. I think it is the last. One of the very last, I think it is the last. One of the very last concepts that I want to talk with you is about different kinds of movements that we can do. And I'm going to again make space on the board for anyone who has to join us watching a recording. So similarly as we have directional terms, we also have terms for physiology. So it's not all about anatomy, it's also about physiology and movements and all that good stuff. So let's go through those. Like my biggest nightmare is that I ruined this board and then my boss yells at me. His office is like right across the room. That's why I'm so stressed when I come here. So the movements. I don't know, it's been a long week. you heard about terms flexion and extension before? Someone goes to the gym and they're like flexing. Where's the B? Right. So flexion is the definition for flexion. I love that you laugh because I feel like my jokes are so bad. At least someone says empathy. How I think of them is that when you flex a body part, you decrease an angle between two parts. So we're not flexing our upper limb, we're decreasing the angle here. When we're extending it, we're increasing the angle. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So why would you want to flex when you show off your muscles? Because then the muscles shorten and they get thicker, they get bigger, they really show up. And then you can extend them. Yoga largely relies on extending a lot of muscles. You stretch your muscles and stuff like that. So those make sense? So let's have a look at a couple of pictures. These individuals, I think people who do sports are always good examples. These individuals are really flexing their body, various different angles in their body. We've now decreased the angle. Make sense? You can also do something that goes beyond extension. You can hyperextend. Hyperextension would be going beyond what's the normal extension. You see how this body is now kind of curved towards the back on both of these. You're going beyond. And a lot of the time, injuries might come if you're doing sports and your body gets hyperextended on certain body part. If you're not used to that, and there's force and there's speed and all that sort of stuff. Makes sense. Two more terms that I want to talk about. Abduction and adduction. So abduction is taking away from the midline of the body. So think of people who go wandering in the forest at night and then they tell that aliens abducted them. They took them away. So similarly, when I'm doing this movement of bringing my upper limb away from my midline of the body, from my trunk, I'm abducting it. I think adduction is easier to think of because it's like adding. Now, you bring it back. Do those make sense? Yes. Next one that I want to talk about is going to be pronation and supination. That might seem like terms that I assume that you haven't faced before that much. They're a little newer maybe. So pronation refers to when you turn your palms downwards, and supination when you turn them upwards. That's one way to look at it. We can just focus on the palms. We can also focus on the entire body, but let's start with the palms. So pronation, turning towards the downwards, and supination, turning upwards. How do you remember this? Yeah. When your hands are in supinated position, you're carrying a bowl of soup. And then your pronation when it's not. That makes sense. Here's the other one that I said, that we can also think of the entire body. You are considered to be in a supine position when you're facing upwards. When you're facing downwards, laying down, you're prone. I think the hands and the palms are more commonly used, but these terms would apply to the whole body as well. Let's have a look next. Elevation and depression. So if you are very elevated, like in church, you can get to the state of elevation. You're going upwards towards the God. So elevating a body part, going upwards. If you're depressed mentally, you're feeling down. Similarly, body parts can be going down. So elevation, depression. Shoulders are a good example of that. But it doesn't have to be just the shoulders. It could be any joint, any other part. Your jaw elevated up, depressed when it's hanging down. Now I have a few more to add. Let's have a look at those. Circumduction kind of goes around, twisting around. And then I also have rotation. Well, that makes sense. Rotating structures. You can do that with your head, upper limb, lower limb, all sorts of things. So all of those movements. So circumduction, think of that as a bigger of a movement, whereas rotation is around its own axis. Circumduction is moving the entire part. Make sense still? Yes? Oh, I did talk about protraction and retraction. So protraction is bringing forward, like your shoulders again. It can be not just elevated and depressions, it can be protraction and retraction. Bringing backwards is retraction. You could do the same again with your jaw. Protraction to bring forward when you have an overbite. Bring backwards when you have retraction. So I think that those are all the movements that I can think of. Really good ones to know. Again, if you were kind of struggling to get notes, I think that's a really good slide that summarizes a lot of those movements for us. And we're not quite yet finished, but that's the end of this PowerPoint. Yay! How do we feel? Was it a lot to take in, or was it manageable? Somewhere in between? Yeah. Enough that you're not bored. Good. That's what I go for. What I'd like to do with you, and I haven't done this with my other classes that I teach, I'd like to go through the study guide that I gave you, the little sheet. I think that could be useful, but since I haven't done it with my other classes, there's a good chance that next time we meet, I'm going to be like, oh, let's go through it. And I'm all excited. Then tell me that we've already gone through it, because I will just go through it again. I have a tendency of getting excited and just going ahead with things. Oh, I'm trying to pull up the material that I want to share on the online class. So again, I don't really upload this anywhere, but and I'm not expecting you to love it. If it helps you to learn, then I'm happy. If it doesn't, you don't have to do that. But it provides a nice summary of everything that we've done. So let's start with the anatomy. Anatomy was the study of structure of the body, whereas physiology was the study of the function. And then we had the pathology, which was study of diseases. Do those make sense? Awesome. I think these were largely revisions. So let's start with the levels of organization first. The left-hand side of the handout that I have for you. I'm not going to ask this in an exam. We've covered it once. You've covered it before. That's all it takes. But atoms were the smallest things. They were made of subatomic particles. If you had 2 or more atoms that made up a molecule, big molecules are macromolecules. Cell was the smallest independently existing living thing. Cells were made of cell organelles. If you had a bunch of cells together, they made up a tissue. Tissues within the same area working for the same purpose made up an organ, or multiple organs that work for the same purpose, like say digestive system, they make an organ system, and various organ systems together make up an organism. We feel good about those? The next one, the characteristics of life. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if that's super important for what we're doing. It was just because I did this for something else, and then I just kept using the certain elements of it. But if you're curious, what is the classification of being alive? Most textbooks would tell you that you need to be able to move, you need to be able to respond to changes, you need to be able to grow, reproduce, you are doing some sort of gas exchange, so respiration. You digest, absorb, there's circulation of materials, so moving substances, you're able to excrete, get rid of stuff, and so on. Life is not quite as simple as we teach you. There are certain forms of life that on one hand are living and on the other hand they're not. And when you go to microbiology, you get to see a lot of those. For example, I think that viruses are a good example of that. They're kind of on the edge of being alive and dead. They fulfill some of the criteria, but not all. But that's for Bio 182 if you're excited about that. Let's have a look at the maintenance things. So certain things that living things do, living things maintain themselves, so they need water, food, oxygen. They normally need heat and some sort of a pressure around them. The pressure needs to be adequate and not too much. So just kind of that was a nice reminder of what we've talked. We talked about the homeostasis before. So you remember it was something changed. We detected with receptor, there's a control center, it has a set point, and then effector acts to stop that stimulus from happening. Most of the time we're gonna see, we should be the other way around. I just haven't had a chance to fix it. So it should be the other way around. Negative feedback stops something from happening. Positive feedback promotes it to happen. Just these symbols. I should flip them around. Most body processes were regulated through negative feedback. Do you remember when did we see positive feedback? 3 times in life? Did we talk about that? We did? No? Okay. I haven't talked about homeostasis with you at all. No? Maybe I talked with another. Let's go through it quickly. So homeostasis refers to the maintenance of consistent environment. So, see, this is why you have to just let me know. I just assumed that we've gone through it, but I don't think we did. So homeostasis is one of those terms that you might have heard, but it's hard to think of it. What does it mean? Why do we talk about homeostasis? And I think the best way to go through it is by using an example. Let's think of your body temperature. What's your typical body temperature? I'll agree with anything because I don't know Fahrenheit system. So just pick a number. I'll be like, yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. If it goes much higher, what will happen? Yeah, you will feel uncomfortable and die eventually. I'm like going to the worst case scenario. I love that you're like, oh, you get a little sweaty. I'm looking, no, you die. Somewhere in between. And if you get too cold, what happens? Eventually, she knows how I think. It's always all about the worst case scenario. I'm always like, if you're a pessimist, you can't be disappointed. So,
Is that an optimistic way to think about it, though?
I don't know. That's a philosophical question. Or was it? I've learned in life, you can have any discussion, and if you ask the end of it, or is it? It sounds like you're really smart.
That's my moments, they're just uniform.
Let's carry on. So stimulus, your body wants to be held within constantly similar conditions. Your body doesn't want a lot of changes to the environment that's inside there. So if the temperature now is getting too cold, you're looking at that. If it's getting too hot, you're looking at that. So your body will have to be able to tell that your body temperature is changing. And how it does that is through a receptor. So receptors can be anything that's responsible for detecting changes in your body. In our example of thermoregulation, it would be thermoreceptors. You have receptors on the surface of your skin, but also inside your body to constantly monitor what's your body temperature. And just detecting that there's something that has changed is not enough. We need to give it meaning. And where does the most meaning given? In your brain. So control center, most of the time, is going to be your brain. So only once a change has happened, we have detected it and we have passed a message to the brain. We're actually aware of that change. The receptor on its own does nothing, but just measure a bunch of things. And within the control center, we have something called a set point. Think of the set point in this example of thermoregulation of like that little box on the wall of the room for AC unit. You set the highest temperature, after which the cooling turns on, and you set the lowest temperature, after which the heating turns on. Between those, you're good. Anything outside, you need to do something about it. And that's where the effector comes in. Effector, again, can be many different things in your body. Their sole function is, if there has been a change, we've detected it, we've compared it against set point, and we've detected that it's going up from the set point, we act on it. And what effector does, most of the time, it tries to stop the stimulus from happening. It doesn't want the stimulus from happening. Your body wants to remain the same. And that remaining the same is known as negative feedback. And the symbol for it would be kind of a line that has a thing at the end. It stops it from happening. Most things in your body, it can be your temperature, it can be your body fluid amounts, it can be your body pH, it can be many, many, many things, are regulated through negative feedback. Change happens, we detect it, we process it, we act on stopping that from happening. Everyone good? There's 3 times in life when we say, no. Now something's happening, we're detecting it, we're processing, and we say, let's make it happen even more. That would be an example of positive feedback. And I can think of only 3 times in life when we have positive feedback happening. Any ideas what would be examples of those 3? Let's start with my favorite one. I used to teach birth and delivery classes. I was like, why me? I wouldn't know anything about it, but I did teach that. So when baby is being born, the head of the baby will push to the uterine wall lining and cause the uterine wall lining to be stretched. There's going to be mechanoreceptors that sense that our uterus is stretching. It gets compared what's normal, and your brain is like, yep, It is happening. The baby's coming out. What's the worst case scenario? That the baby would be coming out in your body. It's like, no, I'm not feeling it up to today, and it's somewhere in between. That's not a great idea. So for that reason, the effector actually implements positive feedback and causes more stretching by pushing the baby out with the remaining of the uterine wall lining. So that would be an example of positive feedback. The initial stimulus promotes more of the change to happen. And I deliver a great class on Bio202 about giving birth. You'll all get to give birth with ping pong balls and balloons, and it comes out. Like moments I live for. That's one of the 3 examples when we see positive feedback in life. The second one is clot formation or scab formation. When you cut yourself, a little bit of scab forming promotes more scab to form. So you won't bleed. So it's again this kind of a positive feedback loop. Stimulus, you're bleeding a little bit, let's make some, let's detect it. Notice that, oh, you're losing blood, let's make some scab. Oh, that makes us to form more scab. It's kind of a positive feedback loop. The third one I think is as well, this is why females are fascinating creatures, because they have a lot of positive feedback going on in them. When you are breastfeeding a child, the baby will suckle the nipple. That will be detected compared to the state what it normally would be. And they're like, oh, the baby's sucking the nipple. Let's bring up the milk and excrete it. And that causes the baby to suckle the nipple even more. And it's, again, promoting. So those are the only 3 times in body when we see positive feedback.
I mean, following that type of formula, could shivering be that? Because it's cold, its body accepts that it is cold and continues to shiver until your body is.
That would be negative feedback. I'm glad you said that, though. Think of, I'm getting cold. I'm detecting I'm getting cold. I'm comparing it to what my body temperature should be. How could I not be cold? I will recruit my muscles to work. As your muscles work, they generate heat. That's what shivering is, essentially. That stops you from getting cold. Negative feedback. It doesn't cause more shivering, because otherwise, once you shiver, you would never stop shivering.
Oh, okay, I see.
It would be like going to a myocardial infarction where your heart just goes, oh, let's do more of that, more. That's not great. But good thinking. You were thinking exactly the right way. Not all responses. Shivering is a physiological response. There can be also behavioral response. If you're getting too cold, what behavioral response could you do?
Oh, okay.
Curl up, put more clothes, and get the hell out of there. Things like that. So not everything is a physiological response. Okay. Did that make sense? Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of thought that we had covered it. That's why you need to let me know when I just carry on. This is also why I do these review sheets, that it keeps me in check. Let's have a look at these body cavities. So I talked about how body cavities can be divided into dorsal and ventral cavities. So the dorsal was the one that was towards the back, posterior. So we have our cranial, where your brain is located within the skull. Then you have your spinal cavity, where your spinal cord runs within the vertebra. For the ventral cavity, we had our thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic region. Can you tell I just made 2 spots, and I was like, I have 3 things, so I just divided it in half because I'm sneaky like that. No, also because a lot of the time we talk about abdominal pelvic cavity. It's often referred as to. We didn't really talk about these abdominal divisions. They're just so you know if you ever run into them. That can be divided into 4 or 9, depending on what classification you use. That helps you to locate where the pain is located, well, what structures are within that area. That's the big idea there. I think we already had a look of these different body systems together, right? For terminology, you'll notice I love using color because that's how I learn. I'm a very visual learner, but again, if it doesn't work for you, you do you. So let's have a look. And I normally have color pencils, but I don't know where they are in this room. I'm just like constantly at a loss. I'll try to find them for the next time. But you can do little abbreviations or you can do textures to mark them. Whatever you wish. It's just a tool to help you. So let's have a look of the two first arrows that we had. Arrow pointing up was our superior. Arrow pointing down was our inferior direction. Everyone good with those? Anterior to the front and posterior to the back. Then I have the medial line and lateral line with yellow arrows. Again, this is just how I would think of it, how I would study it. It doesn't mean that it's a good way of learning. I'm just trying to give you ideas how you can learn. We talked about the proximal and distal part. Proximal close to the starting point or from distal further away. Then we got kind of muddled up the waters. We talked about the cranial and caudal. So cranial towards the skull, caudal towards the tail. So it's just in general. Prone and supine, we talked about the hands. Supine was carrying a bowl of soup. So when you're standing in an anatomical position, your palms are in supine position. And prone is the opposite. And superficial and deep, I tried to draw a dude that has been cut in half. I don't know. I try to draw a lot of things. It doesn't always work out great. Did those make sense? Perfect. Let's have a look at some of the movements. Flexion. Where's the beach? So decreasing the angle between two body parts, usually around the joint. Extension, increasing the angle between two body parts, usually around the joint. Abduction, taking away from the body. People who get abducted to space. And abduction, putting back towards, adding towards you. Pronation and supination, we already talked about that. Elevation, depression. Makes sense. Then I had the planes of the body. And I think that's when I ran out of steam. And I was like, okay, these are all the notes I can think of. So we had our sagittal plane. What was the other term we could use rather than saying sagittal plane? Medial. So that might be medial or median. So that might be something that you might add there with that. Then we had our transverse plane, sometimes also called horizontal plane, divided you into upper and lower part, whereas the sagittal or the median or medial did you do the right and left. And the last one was the frontal plane, gives you front and back, or gives you coronal plane, how you would put on the crown. That's how you cut. Any questions about anything we've covered today? That's it. I know it was a lot. If you could do me one favor before you finish today, take off the little dots from your models, because otherwise you have to do it next time we see. Might as well get it done now. And put those dots with the rest of the clay into the box. And once you've done that, that's all there is for today. Like I said, I will go through the spot test with you before you take it. So don't worry about it. I want to feel this class should not give you any stress. The moment it starts to give stress, let me know. That's all I have for today. So do your skeletons. You can leave the boxes with the clay inside them on the table, and you can leave the skeletons. And once you're done, that's it for today. And I'm going to stop the recording here. I'm really sorry we lost you halfway through. And we'll just bring everyone up to speed through the recording. So that's it for today.